welcome back to IGN's History of Awesome, a year-by-year breakdown of big events that shape pop culture. In 1998, Blizzard took its real-time strategy formula to space in StarCraft. Nintendo gave us two of the most beloved games of all time, The Legend of Zelda: The Ocarina of Time and Banjo-Kazooie. And on Game Boy, we just had to catch them all. It's time to talk all about 1998.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the History of Awesome, possibly the most awesome year in video game history, might be in history. This is 1998. In 1988, we had well, it's an easy argument to make.
History?
It's an easy argument to make. Let me read you off what we're going to be talking about. Just a couple of the things. The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, Pokemon Red and Blue, Half-Life, Metal Gear Solid, Baldur's Gate. Strangely though, in film, there weren't blockbusters of that type. There's stuff like Saving Private Ryan. That was a bigger movie. It's Spielberg. But then there's some sleeper comedies like The Big Lebowski and Rushmore. So let's get right down to it.
I think probably in history. Compare that to like the Parthenon or
Beethoven. That's half the list.
Should we introduce ourselves?
Yes, we should. So on my left here, I have Justin.
Hey.
Steve. Per. And hi, I'm Sam. Ocarina of Time, The Legend of Zelda, Nintendo 64, 1998. This came out, a global release actually, which is kind of neat. November 21st, 1998. I remember where I was. I did not own a Nintendo 64 at the time.
Wow, that's
so
crazy.
This sold me on it for sure. Shigeru Miyamoto is his last directed Zelda. Of course, the creator of the Legend of Zelda series and Super Mario Brothers. Of course, he worked on this with some other famous people, including Aonuma, who now makes all of the Zelda games. So this is kind of a dream team. This game is about two worlds. It's about the past and the future, and a little ocarina that links them together.
Yeah.
Hence the name.
Yeah, it basically, I mean, it duplicates the kind of two-world setup from Link to the Past, where you had the dark and the light world, but they did it so differently in this game. But it's not just that, right? It's like somebody took a Link to the Past, like this perfectly rendered 2D world with like the item lock gates, where like you progress by getting new items, and then did it in a three-dimensional world that changing. It starts to rain at parts in the game. You've got day and night cycles. Like, you go underwater, it just has everything. Yeah, my fond memory for that game, by the way, I played it, I got stuck, and a gentleman helped me out get past it named Shigeru Miyamoto. He was standing behind me. They had an event at here, Julius Castle, and like he was super nervous about all these journalists playing this game for the first time.
What section did you play?
It was, I got stuck when you're going to Hyrule Castle and you have to meet Malon and then climb a vine, and like she only, I think she only showed up at a certain, like you had to do something, or you only showed up during the daytime, and the day-night cycle doesn't pass when you're in town, so you had to go out to a certain area. Yeah, so he pointed that out.
Oh, that's amazing.
It was nice of him.
There are two Links in this game, as well as two worlds. You got Big Link and Little Link. You got Old Link and Young Link, which I really like. It's kind of unexpected when it happens. There's also two Zeldas. A really neat younger Zelda that's a princess, and then a Zelda who becomes a warrior.
Well, there are three Zeldas, really.
Who's the third Zelda?
Sheik.
Spoilers.
Well, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Well, but there's also Zelda as a grown-up woman.
As a grown-up who has the magic shield power.
I mean, that game felt so big when it came out. And I didn't have, I mean, maybe I did have the internet at the time yet, but I hadn't quite figured out to like use the internet to look up game help. And so like, I just remember the Fire Temple, I would go in and try to figure out where I was going and get stuck, and then I would, like the way that I would play games back then was a little schizophrenic. So I would just bounce. I'd get stuck and then just run around the world and just hit stuff with sticks and go back to being young and go back to being old. And that made that game last for like months for me. Like, and then I'd slowly, okay, let me try to take another crack at this temple and then get in. And then that moment where you'd find a key that like you'd just been completely stuck on for weeks, like just felt so good. And like slowly working that way through my game without just, like I would never have the patience for that now. I would just look it up on IGN wikis and guides.
It had those moments where you're exploring the world and you see something that's clearly locked, right? And like now you understand the kind of like the signs of a 3D Zelda game. It's like, oh, that target means hookshot target, right? Like it's so obvious now, but a lot of those things appeared for the first time in 3D. What I really liked was like you would walk into Kakariko Town, right? And like you see the well and you're like, oh man, there's something about the well. So you're spending like an hour trying to figure out how to get in. There's nothing, you can't get in. And then
to come back later.
Later in the story you come back and it's this awesome creepy cutscene of
and
this
it's been
like
under
black
there the whole
swirling
time.
mass. Yeah. That's so good.
So my fondest memory of this game is I stopped playing video games. I had a period of my life in which I got over video games.
Sound very fun.
I know it was sad, and like I didn't have a Nintendo 64. I got burned because of the 32X Sega CD Saturn situation. I was like, this is ridiculous. I'm not doing this. And the PlayStation came out, and I'm like, no more. And I stopped playing for just a little bit. And this is what got me back into it. It's because Thanksgiving this year, my friend had come back from college, and he showed me this game. I was over at his house with my girlfriend. We were just sitting there watching it, and he said, watch this. And he pointed, point anywhere that you can see in the background of this game, and you can go there. And so he was at Lake Hylia, which is what I call it. I know it's Hylia.
You mean Hylia, yeah.
And he said, I was like, well, how about that mountain with a ring around it? And he did. And of course, that's about as far as you can run. But it was a very long period of time, you know, running all across the field, through the village, up the mountain. And then you get to the mountain, and you have to climb the sheer wall, and then you go inside the volcano top. It was like, I mean, there's nothing like that in video games at the time.
Yeah,
remarkable fantasy open world.
That overworld feels small by today's standards. You go over one little hill, and then the castle's right there, but it didn't feel that way back then.
You see things in the distance that are actually not 3D models. It's like tapestry.
Disneyland. It has like a fake hill background.
You know, nowadays you get games like Skyrim where they render the world and you can see the distance and you can go there, but they actually carefully created this world and like had to just struggle and fight the system basically to make it work that way, right?
I mean, it was a gigantic game. I mean, it could be speedrun really rapidly, you know, by today's, but it had 9 dungeons, or really 9.5 if you want to count.
Well, I loved when it opened up and you found out there were 6 more dungeons and 6 more areas.
Right, like
the last couple you don't even expect, like the giant Gerudo Desert.
Yeah, if you're just playing the way I did and just bouncing around this world and you don't know where anything is, you don't know what you're doing. It took you a long time to even become Adult Link, and then you're like, wow, the game's just starting.
It just opens up there. I love that feeling. Incredible. It's like the castle flipping in Symphony of the Night. That you have so much more game to play and you didn't know, and that game just promises so much. I also, we have to mention the soundtrack. I mean, the game is about an ocarina, which is an instrument. It's about playing that instrument, but it's also about a soundtrack that instrument is woven in and out of so brilliantly. I don't think there's a more iconic game soundtrack that's as full, that has so many full orchestrated songs. I mean, there's touring companies that just play Zelda music now.
Yeah, maybe Final Fantasy, but it's certainly up there with.
It's interesting because when Ocarina of Time came out, the game represented a shift from the older Zelda games where you always had an orchestra score playing, right? Like a MIDI score. When you went into the dungeons, actually, they had these atmospheric sound effects, more like some areas in Super Metroid, honestly, and like some of that was the limitation of the platform, right? Like you had to trade off like processor cycles by having multi-layered music, like multi-voice music. So they did very simple stuff.
Like the forest tempo just had weird screams.
And so it's very simple, but that restraint makes it so memorable and it sounds so great.
It was a hugely innovative game with things like Z-targeting, you know, really figuring out how to make combat work in a 3D space. Things that were copied, you know, yet another sort of Miyamoto just stroke of brilliance that you would see like a lightning strike, and then games are different after it. That.
It's funny because the way they do it nowadays on the Wii U or even on the Wii, I don't think we're as elegant as that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, Z-targeting, just to explain if you hadn't played it, is that you don't move a camera around when you encounter an enemy because you don't have another stick to move your camera around. So what you do is you just lock onto that enemy, and so you're always circling around it. And it makes for action combat that's really nice because you can parry and dodge and attack in a really, really fluid way.
I remember thinking weird things that were controversial at the time that now are like, you just kind of accept. Yeah, the no jump button, exactly.
Yeah.
You couldn't understand how it would work, but it totally works great.
Totally, yeah.
So earlier the same year, which is striking to me that this came out earlier, Banjo-Kazooie hit the Nintendo 64 as well. Another iconic game. It came out in June of that year, and as I mentioned before, Zelda came out in November. So Banjo-Kazooie was kind of the, it looked at face value like a knockoff of Mario 64, and in some ways, and then also that it was like a mascot platformer with this like goofy bear and bird. A real turnoff until you just started playing it and realized like what a remarkable 3D platformer that
I remember when it was announced, we were very disappointed. It was actually called Project Dream, right? And nobody knew what this new game from Rare would be.
Remember that term, I'm going to bring that back.
Yeah, and Dream then was revealed to be like I mean, really, the characters looked very generic. We called them Bear the Bear and Bird the Bird, right? And you're like, oh no, that's what Project Dream is. But then you started playing it, and like the score alone, like the Teddy Bear's Picnic song that they had in there, they figured out how to do texture blending, where instead of like, if you look at Mario 64 and even Ocarina of Time, they overlaid like these color-changing textures over everything. The game looks so vibrant.
Instead of just one texture on a wall, there's like a shadow texture over a background texture, and you can color those. So you get these great gradients that look like real light playing on a wall. Of course, they weren't using light for any of this. It was just textures.
Pre-lighting.
But it looks so different.
I mean, Banjo-Kazooie, and then we would get Perfect Dark, I think maybe 1 year later or two, but like that's really rare at their peak, in my personal opinion. You know, they would sort of, games like Donkey Kong 64 be criticized for being a collectathon, but Banjo really struck that balance perfectly between, there's Jinjos in each stage, but like each note, or each puzzle piece is, you're collecting just jiggies in the game. Each one is a little objective, and then, you know, the notes all serve a purpose and are leading you to specific parts in the map.
New areas are, new puzzles. I really like it. I don't think of it as a collectathon. Donkey Kong 64.
That's why
the notes were a guiding hand more than anything, whereas in DK, it was just bananas everywhere, every color, and it wasn't that much fun.
Well, I also think, I recently replayed Banjo-Kazooie on the Xbox 360, Xbox One in the Rare Replay, and the notes stay collected when you leave the stage, and they didn't in the N64. You had to get all 100 in one run. If you wanted to get them all. So if you got 95 and then fell to your death. And so I remember you needed to figure out, like, this is the most dangerous part of this stage. This is the most challenging part. So I'm gonna get those 5 notes first. And like figure out a priority list of like, do this part, then you'll die 10 times, but then once you get them, then it's like, it's kind of easy after that. It's like figuring out the perfect route through a place like Rusty Bucket Bay.
They took that out in the remake. I think that was a big part of it.
Yeah, it's you know, modern gaming wouldn't really tolerate that sort of note collection, but something is definitely lost by.
So we're honored to have the original reviewer of Banjo-Kazooie right with us. He gave it a 9.6 on IGN.com.
I did?
And he happened to, this is Per Schneider, he happened to conclude his review with a poem, which I'm going to read right now to cap off our discussion of Banjo-Kazooie. You switch it on and think, oh no, this game plays just like Mario, but keep on going and then soon the depth of gameplay makes you swoon. Characters goofy and writing clever, if only the boots would talk forever. Dynamic music is too cool, the graphics knock you off your stool. No blur, no fog, no crappy sound, a major flaw cannot be found. With levels deep and textures rich, this bear makes Gex and Croc his...
Wow, look at edgy. Well, you have to actually have that as subtitles.
I've had that in my pocket for over a week.
While you hear like...
It's hard to believe that this isn't your first language.
Thank you.
Poetry like that.
Yeah, I know. It's beautiful. It was, No, I mean, the game, obviously, the text that Grundhilda says is rhymes, right? Like, she speaks in rhymes. So that's why, you know. I was being meta.
I love the end of that. The trivia at the end, the trivia game at the end of Banjo-Kazooie.
The trivia game's terrible. It's such a great game, but
I like it. That game has so many different gameplay styles in it, so many awesome characters, and like the boots, right? Like the boots make farting noises. What can be better? Farting boots.
The tall boots, you mean, when you're walking?
No, there's a pair of boots.
Oh, do you talk to?
Yeah.
Okay, so, same year, all right? We're still in the same year, still on Nintendo stuff. Pokemon Red and Blue launched in the United States this very same year, September 28th, 1998. Let me blow your mind right now.
96.
The Pokemon, it's 1998. The Pokemon trading card game launched in December 1998, so that's 2 months later. The anime, Pokemon I Choose You, the first episode, aired September 8th, 1998. So Nintendo had a game that came out in 1996 in Japan and balled up this big package around it. That was a show, a card game, and a game release, and it worked. Oh my gosh, Pokemon was pretty quickly everywhere.
Yeah, and it was not, as you said, this was a blitz. They engineered this success. They announced it. I was at an event called Nintendo Space World, which was Nintendo's E3. They used to have this every year in Japan, in Tokyo. And, you know, I forget if it was, I think it was Yamauchi even, someone went on stage and said, we are going to bring this Pokemon game to America.
Pocket monsters.
Pocket monsters. People don't think this kind of game will be a success in Japan, in the US, but we will make it a success. Trust us. And then a year later, it is a humongous success.
It's an engineered success, but it's an earned success, right? I mean, that sense of collecting all the Pokemon, but it's not just collecting for collection's sake. Like, sort of building the perfect team, and once you get a new Pokemon, you can add them to your team, and that's going to let you defeat.
You want to be the very
leader,
best, like no one ever was.
Yeah.
But no, that's a good point. You not only use your Pokemon to kind of progress in the game and unlock new areas and get better at fighting enemies, but you can fight your friends with them and you can trade your friends with them.
It's really smart. It's smart that like each Pokemon you get isn't just ticking off a box in your Pokedex, that they actually can mean something to you. And,
some were so hard to get. I mean, the 151st Pokemon, there were only 151 Pokemon one day. Back then, remember that?
It fueled such like a playground conversations of like rumors.
How did you get Porygon?
Some were true and some weren't true.
And Mew was the big untrue one, or the big true one. You could only get Mew through an official Nintendo distribution, but people did figure out how to glitch.
And then they figured out Missing No and all that stuff. Yeah, I mean, what was so special about that game is how personal the experience felt to you, right? Because you really team of Pokemon was the same, and like then you kind of like you were either the water guy or the fire type guy. It was just really cool to see the differences between players.
Well, and you could take your Pokemon, the actual ones that you'd raised and collected with you from game to game. And I think there was a break. I think you could take them from the Game Boy games all the way through the GBA. But I think there's a break there in the DS ones. I don't think there's a way to carry them over anymore.
By the way, really interesting that when the game came out in Japan, it was Pokemon Blue and Green, right? They didn't actually bring out Green until way later with, now there's the Leaf Green.
And your three starters, we should say, are Charmander, Bulbasaur and Squirtle. So because of that, that's where you get the red, blue, and green. But then Pikachu became so popular, you had to make a yellow to start with Pikachu.
Yeah, no, I thought it was interesting because you can tell, like, the game is a success because it's so good, but the marketing played such a big role. Just picking different colors for the US launch, right? Like how carefully everything was engineered. Just
the two versions
so much thinking.
So interesting and forcing people to trade. I mean, the cynical part of me sort of says, yeah, they're trying to sell more Pokemon, but it is interesting that they really wanted to emphasize that trading aspect and that social aspect of it.
Imagine if that game had been made during the era of microtransactions, right?
Oh my goodness gracious!
We gave it a
How much for the
10
Pikachu?
out of 10.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
No surprise there. Although there was a slightly different rating scale for mobile games at the time.
Our handheld channel, which we had just spun up, had a 10-point scale. So, there are a lot of 9s and 10s.
Yeah, Guinness Book of World Records says this is the best-selling RPG of all time.
Huh?
Wow.
Yeah, a lot of copies across a lot of consoles. Okay, let's switch. Let's switch gears. We're gonna switch to Metal Gear. But on PlayStation that year, 1998, September 3rd, Ocarina of Time was yet to come out, and we get Metal Gear Solid, which is a remake of a kind of obscure, not a remake, sorry, a sequel to a kind of obscure NES MSX game that people didn't really know and play in the mainstream, but boy did this game become mainstream.
I mean, Metal Gear Solid, I've always hesitant to call something the first anything, because there's always like a progenitor that did something earlier, but it's the stealth game. It's the game that stealth games were one way before Metal Gear Solid, and they were a different way after that, and they owe it all to that franchise. I feel like Metal Gear strikes the perfect balance, just like Banjo-Kazooie struck the perfect balance of sort of collecting things. Metal Gear later would fly off the rails and just become insane. The story's insane, and the guy's got this arm that's haunted and all this crazy stuff. And Metal Gear had crazy zaniness in it, but it was sort of one step simpler. And so it had this complex, complicated story full of, psychics and double crosses. But it was really interesting.
And strange conversations at the most inopportune times, right? Like you're crawling through a tunnel, you're talking about like rats and,
But it wasn't too much at the time, and it was still all about the
story
gameplay.
Wasn't too much, is what you're saying.
Right.
The game was overly complicated, I thought at the time.
Oh, I didn't.
But in a way that I wanted to probe it and explore it more.
It was more like it was an open-ended proposition, right? It wasn't like get this gun, go in this room, kill these 3 guys, go to the next room. It was very much asking the player to come in and figure out their own solution to the problem.
And then it was so great because the game didn't take itself seriously all the time, right? Like it was a game that was completely aware of it being a video game, whereas a lot of other other games tried to like get rid of the HUD and make the cinematics, make it look more like a movie, like thinking of Resident Evil. This game basically put a giant exclamation mark over the heads of their characters, right?
And it accepted that was kind of ridiculous, right? I think we're going to see this also. We're going to talk about Fallout 2 in a little bit. Fallout 2 did the same sort of fourth wall breaking thing where they said, we're a game, it's supposed to be slightly insane, so like let's just embrace that.
Metal Gear was really revolutionary. It was really Kojima starting to stretch, stretch his wings a little bit. You know, things like just hiding in the cardboard box, that humor, but in the early stages when the snow is falling and you're outside, guards can see your footsteps and follow you to where you're hiding. Like stuff like that felt like a really big deal, and it was sort of outside of the scope of what we thought video games could be at that time. Things like you were starting to get some of those weird Easter eggs that again would kind of go too far. Like in later Metal Gear games, if you shoot a glass that has ice in it, then the ice would land and melt over the course of like an hour. This game had some of that detail, but in a more practical way. Like if you put on a box and then a dog can pee on the box, and then you can sneak past the wolves later because they have that scent on it. Like,
and it used the rumble in the controller, all sorts of
the
like
Psychomantis
box
Easter
eggs,
gimmicks.
It read you.
The bosses are all great. It's a game about tactical what do they call it?
Tactical espionage
action, which is stealth is what we call that now. But there's also these boss fights, and they're cinematic boss fights, and they're
all different.
Yeah, they're all very different, and sometimes you don't even fight the boss really. And I think that's really interesting. And they all have kind of they're paired with an animal, right? So are they?
Yeah, I guess they have animal names.
Revolver Ocelot, like they all have this kind of thing. Psychomantis, and it always reminded me of like that era of like Mega Man X, where there was like these robot bosses that were all tied with animals, and it's just like it's that early that it kind of is similar to that kind of thing.
Full of moments like that, like those footsteps. Like you have these cigarettes in your inventory, and then you don't know what they're for. They don't know what you're for, and then you smoke the cigarettes, and then that smoke lets you see these lasers that you need to avoid. These just awesome.
But at first, doesn't it take down your health? Like there's so many. You're like, wait, why did I do that? Right?
The moment that stabs out
the magazines, right?
You can distract people.
Is that the original?
It might have just been in the remake.
Yeah, I get some of that conflated in my head. There's a torture scene in that game, and it's really hard. I mean, maybe it's not. I remember it being.
You can beat it. You can ignore it or beat it, right?
Well, that's the thing. That's what's really interesting about it is you have to alternate these button presses, and it's really, really hard to do, which is a pretty standard video game thing. And the Metal Gear twist is that you can submit and give up.
Yeah.
And you only get one try. If you die, you go back to your last save, which could potentially have been before a boss fight, although players wised up and would eventually learn to save after that boss fight. And I think it's just really interesting that it gives you the choice. It's like, hey, if this is too hard for you, you can submit to the torture. And then you don't know it at the time, but you'll get the bad ending after that.
Wow.
So speaking of tactical combat espionage, Tom Clancy was a very popular spy author, right? And he got his name on a little video game called Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six. It was the very first in a series of awesome games. I didn't play this one. In 1998, it came out August 21st. I did miss out because I never realized that well, you can talk about this more, but we were talking about this before the show. I never realized that it was like really about not only like obviously tactical team-based stuff, but it was really easy to die, and you just be put out of the game right away.
That was
you have to wait.
There was really you get shot, you don't lose health, you're gone.
Yeah,
basically.
You can maybe take a hit, and then that second one will drop you. But it was a one-shot, one-kill proposition most of the time.
And it was all about a lot of the shooters like Quake were all about speed and getting really good at just the controls and the twitchiness of it all. This game was about meticulously planning something, right? Like being careful, sneaking up, but also collaboration. It had an 8-player co-op mode.
Yeah.
You could play with your friends against the AI, or you could do 8v8 against your friends, right?
It had tons of amazing.
So how did
missions.
you do that planning?
Well, so they had this really clunky interface where you're looking at a blueprint of the level, and it's either you're infiltrating a dam or a villa.
Could you talk to your friends?
There's an amusement park. You had to have a separate VoIP program. Like you had to set that up separately. It wasn't built into the game. This was way back when everything was like third party.
Roger Wilco and all those.
You had to do all.
But people did that. They went through that trouble.
100%.
Oh, for sure.
Or you played at LAN, right?
Yeah, and it was the type of game that like the audience that was attracted to that game cared about that enough to get invested in it. But the planning was just so laborious, and you had these different teams, and you would move them out, and you drew little lines for where you wanted them to go, and had different like call signs or different go codes for different parts. Like you guys wait at this door till I press this button, and then burst through the door while I'm in this other part of the level, rescuing a hostage or disarming a bomb. And it was the worst part of the game. I mean, it was so essential to I think what they were trying to do, but you ended up spending more time planning than you spent executing the mission.
It seemed so cool when you first did. You're like, I can't believe you get to plan this assault, and it made you feel good. And then after 3 games, you're like, I wish I didn't have to play.
After 3 games, what you did is you divided your squad up into 3 teams, and you just left them all at the start and took each team out individually until you got them killed, and then you'd start with the next team and bring them out.
Exactly. That reminds me, they're still showing off in the new Rainbow Six games. They show these people like intricately coordinating. They read off a script, like in the E3 demo, you know, and like that's the allure of them, is that you're supposed to work with your friends. I have never had that many people I could work with proactively on a video game in my entire life. So I can't believe you guys had a good experience with this at the time.
We did. I mean, it was fun in single player. The AI was pretty good. You have those things where 2 guards are next to each other and you shoot one guy and he falls and the other guy's just still looking around. So there were some of those limitations towards the late 90s. But
some deaf players.
It was super fun. I mean, the idea that you could play a shooter that wasn't like Quake, where these guns maybe had the effect on the in-game avatars that they would have in real life, made it really tense. And it was a very thoughtful, slow game that all of a sudden would erupt in this sort of frenzy of like shooting and oh my God, who's still alive? And when your guys died in the mission, they were gone for the campaign. So Ding Chavez, if he goes out in the first mission, you're done. You're not seeing Ding anymore.
So just to wrap this up, you made the point earlier that Tom Clancy is kind of a household video game name now.
Yeah, I mean, I would say for us at least, we know Tom Clancy more from the games than we have from the books.
There was in War. The Series 2, Rainbow Six,
Splinter Cell, Ghost
Recon. Yeah, there's so many. Tom Clancy became a big video game world.
Yeah.
But at the time, he was an author and
he had written Hunt for Red October, which was very popular. He had written the book Rainbow Six, which was popular. Patriot Games, like all the Jack Ryan stuff. There were a number of movies about that, but nowhere near as successful or as high profile as I think the games are.
And I feel like the name Tom Clancy wasn't that known with the movies, right? Like you knew Patriot Games and Harrison Ford.
Tom Clancy wasn't the brand so much.
But Ubisoft really created this brand around any of the kind of tactical espionage stealth games, right?
Well, when I was working for IGN way back in 1998, I was working in North Carolina near the Red Storm studio, and I'd go there and visit those guys all the time. You never saw Tom Clancy there.
Yeah.
Like I think it was just a licensing deal for him. He saw, here's a group that knows how to make this game. They'll kick me a couple $1,000s or whatever it was in exchange for the brand recognition of putting Tom Clancy at the top of this thing and using the world I created in the novel.
Yeah. It's crazy. It's still going.
Look where it is today.
Still going, yeah.
So in 1998, 2 doctors quit their jobs.
Yeah.
And they started a medical software company.
Dr. Mario
and then they're
Robotnik.
like, this is lame. So they decided to make a video game, and they called their company BioWare because there was a doctor software company. But they made a game called Baldur's Gate, which came out December 21st, 1998. Right
with a group of 60 people who had never released a game. That entire team, that was their first game.
Now learn how to make a game for us.
Yeah, exactly. What they said.
Baldur's Gate is an absolutely incredible RPG, one of the greatest RPGs ever made. But it is notable that this game, tiny little characters that are smudges on your screen. Sure. And that came out the same year, as Metal Gear Solid, as Banjo-Kazooie. Like, it felt like a game that was 5 years older than it actually was.
I think that's because the team was so inexperienced, right?
Yeah. Well, I also think it made up for it. It had incredible depth in other ways, and it was just choosing not to display it.
But I feel like it was familiar to those who played pen and paper RPGs, right? Like, it felt more like something that harkened back to like the early days of PC RPGs and the kind of board game stuff.
It didn't even, it wasn't even referencing that. It was using that as its source material. It was set in the Forgotten Realms, which is D&D's sort of default setting, and it was using the second edition rules.
Does that mean that it was a licensed D&D?
Yeah. It used the D&D game system, and characters would show up.
So how did a team of 60 people that were from a medical software company licensed?
Because RPGs were pretty bleak in the late 90s, except on the consoles that we've talked about already. But this was way past SSI and the Gold Box games.
Computer RPGs were not in a great place.
You'd had Diablo, which had come out before, and Fallout had been just earlier that year. But CRPGs were pretty bleak back then. I think mostly because a lot of the development potential was being realized on the FPS and RTS side, right? Where it's like, look how good graphics can be. Let's make a shooter or let's make an RTS, which is why I think the sort of aberration of having this amazing game be built on this infinity isometric, weird sprite-based engine actually worked.
I think I have a unique perspective on Baldur's Gate because I didn't play it until last year.
Oh wow!
And I knew, I like computer games. I like Fallout. Like this, I know this game's up my alley, and I just didn't, I just missed it. And it was hard. Like it's hard to get into. It's this combination of The D&D system is really challenging to get into at that time. You know, the THAC0 and all of that.
Second edition had been streamlined from first edition, but it was still very hard to approach.
And it's built on this game system that's really complicated. But then just, you know, you're playing a computer game that's, you know, over 15 years old. And so that brought, I had these false starts where I would start and stop, start and stop. And finally I pushed through, and thank God I did, because it's this incredible, rewarding RPG experience. And that system of exploring these maps, these pre-rendered maps, and they start out all black, and you fill them in like an RTS game, you know, as you explore the world. And then I crisscross each little bit of the map, A, to make sure I'm not missing anybody to talk to, but B, because it's really satisfying me to see them all filled in afterwards. And they kind of stitch together into an actual world map in some ways. The city of Baldur's Gate is probably one of the greatest video game cities ever made.
I would agree with that.
Multiple screens big there's not really any reason for there to be multiple inns except that that's realistic, and people's houses that you can go into, and 9 times out of 10 there's nothing happening, but then 1 time out of 10 you'll find some smuggling operation or something weird going on.
It was just showing, though, how big worlds can be, right? Like how digital worlds are no longer these small, kind of confined levels. Like you have this whole world that's open to you. So having a town with multiple inns just felt
Not
right.
just that, but like you could do what you wanted in that game. You could be who you wanted to be, and that's in contrast to like one of my other favorite RPGs is Secret of Mana. Like I love that game, but that game tells you, hey, this is what you are, and this is what you're doing. And Baldur's Gate says, be a wizard, be a fighter. We don't care. Be a good guy, be a bad guy.
Sounds like
and
Final Fantasy 1.
The game will sort of adapt around your values. Like whatever you bring to the game will reflect that back at you in a very like immediate, consequential way.
It's really powerful. It's not quite open because you can't just walk straight to Baldur's Gate and get in. But this game, the general consensus is that Baldur's Gate 2 is the better game. Almost everyone, you know, agrees. It's higher level D&D, etc. But it loses that sense of just wandering around in the wilderness that Baldur's Gate 1 has. You know, the person that's been sort of raising you dies, and then you're sent out into this world, and you can go. Well, yeah, you can go north, south, east, or west, and you know, if you go one direction, you're going to get messed up. If you go another direction, you're going to find some halflings, and just wandering around this overworld lost is incredibly fun and rewarding. Baldur's Gate, I highly recommend that you check it out. If you look at the screenshots, you'll be like, man, I don't know. But like, push through that. Use a guide if you have to. Just play this game.
So and the things you love about Mass Effect and Dragon Age, like they're all right there. Like the DNA of that studio could not be more clear.
Well, not Blue Aliens.
It's no Blue Aliens.
All right, no Blue Aliens.
That's what I like about Mass Effect.
Okay.
I like the dialogue options. You can be a jerk sometimes. You can solve a lot of combat through dialogue. Not as much as a game like Planescape, but you know, there's a lot of that in there.
You mentioned in Baldur's Gate that it's a very open experience. You get to choose whatever you want to do, very open-ended, and that it kind of looked old school. This is the very opposite game. Half-Life came out November 8th, 1998. Gorgeous, and channeled you right through the story it wanted you to see without you ever knowing that you were being channeled through a story.
And in a very clever way. Again, like talking about first-person shooters being one thing, Rainbow Six being another thing. Suddenly you have storytelling told in a first-person perspective, the way that we really hadn't seen it before, right? Like the way, usually games start, you're jumping out of an airplane or you're running into a house and you're shooting people. Half-Life doesn't do that.
No.
It has very slow build, and it starts to kind of tell you like there's something creepy and weird going on. Before you know it, it's like dimensional rifts have opened and the crap hits the fan.
I may be in a minority here, but I actually don't think the story in Half-Life is all that great. But I think the storytelling, like the way they tell the story, is what made that game innovative to me. Because there, as far as I remember, virtually no cutscenes in the game.
No.
Everything is player controlled. You never see yourself from the outside unless you're looking in a mirror. And it starts off right away with that train ride where you're in this train car and you're just looking around. And like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
It's a series of vignettes. It's like it's introducing the humor of the game, like you go by toxic waste, or it introduces the kind of danger of where you are because the computer or the announcement is talking about all these horrible outcomes. It's very Portal in that sense.
It's Lovecraft. I mean, this whole weird duality.
Just environmental storytelling, and certainly there's been games that have done that before, games like Super Metroid and any number of games, but it doesn't need to tell you like you're Gordon Freeman and you're going into this facility, level 1, start. Like the game just plops you in and lets you sort of figure things out or not figure things out based on how observant you are.
Gordon Freeman is not really a character. I mean, he's a set of nerdy glasses and a crowbar, and that's sort of it. And I think that's what works for that game is you know, he doesn't try to project any of himself onto the world the way that, say, Duke Nukem would.
Yeah.
But even in that experiment chamber at the very beginning, like they're telling you what to do, and you're going around taking actions while the game is happening around you.
Yeah.
And for me, that was a very new thing because I was used to being in charge of all of the triggers, you know, or it being really spelled out for me. But here I was like a little bit lost and a little bit bumbling at the beginning of that game. And like I really loved that.
Well, and like for a while, like if you sick a new player onto it right now, they're gonna stand there, watch this thing and go like, why is nothing happening, right? You have to make things happen. It's like this puzzle, and sometimes it doesn't make 100% like sense what you need to do, like pushing the cart into
the thing to cause the disaster. It's it's like all you're doing is going to like you trying to find something to interact with. The first thing you can interact with is like a tray that runs into a beam and opens up another dimension because you're clumsy.
It's really an adaptation of
place to put the player in.
Yeah, it's an adaptation of Peter Sellers' The Party. Like you just make things happen by accident.
The alternate perspective is once you replay those games, people are, oh, hey Gordon, how are you? As you're like jumping on the console. Waiting because the game you have to wait for the action to happen before you can move on through the theme park.
If you watch Let's Plays of that now, everybody just like because it's so much of a controllable cutscene, they're just waving the camera irritatedly back and forth and nodding and jumping around.
That's how I play, especially when I play Half-Life 2. I'm just flipping objects around wildly.
Yeah, when you have the gravity gun and you're supposed to be listening to someone talk, you can basically be throwing a couch back and forth.
Yeah.
But what was great about it is that, first of all, it does the storytelling in a first-person shooter where you wouldn't expect it. You would have expected action right from the get-go, and then when the action comes, it's really good. I mean, it's such a well-tuned game,
it's really
and
smart,
the enemies are smart. Right, like the enemies react to what's going on in real time. It's just a much better game compared to other games that came out.
Great weapons, great, and just everything.
There are plenty of monsters. There are not really any bosses in the game. There are a couple, but there are plenty of monsters and puzzles where like gun's not going to help you. Like you've got to figure out a way, not even to defeat the thing. You just have to get by it. You know, and I really love that sort of flipping the expectations that you have as a shooter fan on their head, where I'm not actually supposed to kill this thing. I just need to survive.
I love that.
It's one of those games that, again, has been sort of, if you look at it through the lens of time, lots of games have done it since, but it's hard to overstate how fresh and different that felt at the time, coming off of Quake and Unreal. Like, it was a completely different animal.
And then that moves into Team Fortress and Counter-Strike. Like, Valve was very open about what they did with this game and invited people to make their own thing with it. And I mean,
yeah, that's a good point. There were people, ex-Microsoft, people that started Valve.
Yeah, Gabe Newell left Microsoft and started Valve.
And when they did that, they had this kind of, I don't know, they've always kind of had like a code of honor where they're like, hey, we're from this community of people that share code and stuff like that, and they were really open with their engine.
And this was their first thing. Look where they are now. I mean, Valve is, in my opinion,
look where they are now. They don't
first
make
party
games
of
anymore.
PC, right? I mean, they are to PC what Nintendo or Sony or Microsoft are to the consoles.
Yeah. They don't even have to make Half-Life anymore.
They're definitely not making Half-Life anymore, apparently.
Confirmed?
It's very sad.
Okay, so StarCraft. Another small game.
Oh, man.
Came out in 1990. This is never going to end. It just keeps going.
StarCraft, Halo, Baldur's Gate, or Half-Life.
Just the amount of...
We're not done yet either.
The hours I've spent playing these games, especially StarCraft.
Yeah.
We hooked it up I went to UC Berkeley. We just set up we networked the Macs later. I think the Mac version was
there was
later.
weird console versions of StarCraft.
Yeah, well StarCraft 64, which is actually a really good adaptation.
Pretty good,
We played StarCraft just every night in the lab until like 3 a.m., then went home and just academically were not that great.
So StarCraft is...
You did all right eventually. That
was fun, yeah.
Young Justin that played StarCraft knew it was a great game, but old Justin now sort of recognizes it as probably the greatest RTS ever made. I mean, I feel pretty comfortable making that judgment, at least for myself.
It was honestly, and it had an uphill battle because when it was first shown, it wasn't like people said, "Oh no, Warcraft 2 was so good. What are you doing?"
Well, it also didn't look great. Like they took that feedback to heart, and then when they re-unveiled StarCraft, it was a very different game. But it's so Warcraft 2, Blizzard, and other RTS games were already starting to toy with asymmetrical setups. Like these different squads aren't just palette swaps of one another. StarCraft really amped that up to 11, and the Zerg and Terran and Protoss are radically different from one another, on a fundamental level, from their structures to how they build their units to what those units are, and it's almost impossible to understand or believe that it's all balanced.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't, right? Like, I mean, the Zerg were super powerful in the beginning. Like, over time, I think the game
But they did get there, right? I mean,
but it was remarkable how they set up, like, the Protoss have to use the pylons to power their machines and their buildings and everything. The Zerg have to spread this carpet of creep. The humans can like fortify their tanks.
The humans' buildings can get up and fly away, and nobody else can do that, and yet somehow the game still works.
Yeah, and it works.
And isn't a mess.
And then the voice samples, right? Like already Warcraft was so memorable with the voice samples. Like all the StarCraft lines, from kind of like sound-alikes to like Sulu from Star Trek to like Mr. Burns even, right? Like you kind of, everybody got something different out of that game.
I actually really think the campaign is very, very strong. Like obviously StarCraft is a multiplayer game. That's the intention. You're going to spend 1,000 hours playing this with your friends and strangers. But if you only bought that game to just play through the story, you're still getting a totally satisfying experience. There's a lot of mission variety. I actually find the story and the writing really intriguing and interesting with good twists and turns. You get to play as all three sides, so there's not really any villains. I mean, there are villains, but like they have a reasonable perspective. I don't know. I don't really have enough good things to say about StarCraft.
Did you play a lot of versus, or did you play like? Did you collaborate and take on the AI a lot? Because in the end, that's what we did more than playing against each other.
I did that more, and in Brood War as well. Yeah, it was more fun because it was less. There was less pressure on you competitively, and that was that was like couch co-op. It was a social experience, right? And we're enjoying this time together playing. But yeah, that third faction is what did it for me. Blizzard and the folks at Westwoods kept sort of leapfrogging each other throughout the years, and then StarCraft brought in this third faction. I was just like, wow, I can't believe that you're able to make this game work.
I don't know my enduring memory of StarCraft. I don't remember if it's literally the first game I played online, but that's my first strong experience of playing a video game over the internet.
Sure.
And I would play only on the map Big Game Hunters, and I would only play on a version of it that had way more like unlimited resources. So it was stupid. It was stupid as hell. You would just turtle up for like an hour and max out your army, and then just smash your army together with the other players.
Nuclear launch detected.
Yeah. Nuclear launch
detected.
Right
there, it has so many memorable moments where like you feel like you're at the top of your game, and then your friend completely screws you over.
And I was also playing online. I was pretty young at the time, and I didn't have any concept of. I mean, I beat the whole campaign, but that doesn't set you up for multiplayer at all. I had no concept of build order or build priority, or like you need to get this many drones before you expand, and like. That's what even to be a mediocre player online, you need to understand that stuff. And I didn't know any of that. I'm just like, I beat the campaign. I'm good at this game. And then just got smashed over and over again on the internet and like trial by fire. That was my experience with StarCraft on the internet.
So if you were a console gamer like me for most of your life, you might not have realized that Fallout 3 was called Fallout 3 because there was 2 prior Fallout games.
You have a source on that? That doesn't seem to check out.
So Fallout 1 came out September 30th, 1987.
Yeah, we're sneaking it in.
But Fallout 2 came out September 30th, 1998. You like Fallout 2 better, right? Is that
I do, which is a controversial opinion among some people because it takes itself a little less seriously. It's got more jokey references in it.
You think 2 better?
I mean, I did too. Maybe it's not that controversial, but I know it is among certain Fallout fans who felt that Fallout 1 was a pure game just because it wasn't as lighthearted.
But what this has in common with Fallout 3 is it has a big explorable wasteland.
Yeah.
But it's not a massive 3D game or even a top-down game. It's an isometric game, which means it's pulled to an angle, and but it still is a lived-in post-apocalyptic world with a huge backstory.
Yeah.
And I think that's like a great attraction to the Fallout universe.
And I think it's funny. I mean, lots of people obviously played Fallout 3. Fallout 3 was a mainstream success that so many people played. Different studio, right? I mean, you look at the art style in the world, and you look back at the isometric games. You see how it's rooted in them, but it's a completely different team, right?
Yeah. So Fallout 2 was made by Black Isle, working for Interplay, who had made the first Fallout game, and both of those outfits were also working with BioWare on Baldur's Gate. So it's like all these folks kind of sharing this knowledge and how are we going to get this to work. And yeah, for me, again, the open-ended proposition of Fallout. Be who you want to be, go where you want to go, be a total a-hole, be a good guy.
Right. That was defined by something called GURPS, which became special.
Yeah, so GURPS was Steve Jackson's pen and paper game. It stands for Generic Universal Role-Playing System. Tal and Ace play it all the time. And the appeal of it was you don't need to buy a Star Frontiers game to play space. You don't need to buy D&D to play fantasy. Just buy this one system, and it works for everything.
And you have to create a lot for that.
Yeah, you have to do some of the heavy lifting yourself. But Steve Jackson, I guess, apparently objected to their use of that system for Fallout.
So they were going to be public about using GURPS, which stands for
Generic Universal Role-Playing System.
But special stands for the attributes in Fallout.
They had to change it.
Strength, perception, etc. Yeah.
But is that similar to GURPS? I don't know anything about GURPS, so
not really.
You don't choose the attributes.
You want to go on this because we can do this for.
I don't know if
that's about it. You're done.
So yeah, GURPS is a point by system. So you can buy your attributes and say I want to be this strong, or I want to be this smart, or I want to be this dexterous.
Okay, so it is about attributes.
And then you can spend other points on skills. So it is kind of similar to Fallout. There are advantages and disadvantages you can buy as well to. If you want to buy the advantage of I'm super alert so I can act faster than other people, that costs 10 points. But if you want to buy the disadvantage that I'm bloodthirsty and I kill people when they surrender to me, then you get 10 extra points because that affects your reputation.
It always has like any great computer RPG, that you don't really see bleed over into the console side as often. This system of trade-offs, like I want to be really charismatic, but I also want to be really strong. But then if I'm both those, then I'm an idiot because my intelligence is so low. And like, if you can end up with a balanced sort of generic character or really strongly role play in one way or the other, has the other great hallmark of a computer RPG in that it's very, very reactive to who you are as a player and what you want to do. A low intelligence Fallout run is hilarious. Like if your intelligence is 1 in that game, you basically can't speak. You just speak in grunts and like no one communicates with you and like you're literally like an idiot, an imbecile. Like that's the hero of this game. And like even your internal monologue is like
you can carry heavy stuff.
It's like must get thing from computer, bash computer to get thing, and like that's how you get the chip. Whereas like it's not like that if you have any intelligence level above 1. But it felt sort of like magic that the game would respond to you in that way. Where
almost like the first time you play a text adventure or something.
Yeah, it's definitely got that sort of...
You wanted to try out the different paths.
Well, and that upped replay value so much. Like, it's a radically different game. Like, you can roleplay as a guy that only uses his fists, or roleplay as someone that...
You could do super stealthy. You could do somebody who's charming and like relies on speech and diplomacy.
I don't know if you can literally get through the game without fighting. I think you can. I think you can talk the boss into... Spoilers. You can talk the boss into killing himself if your stats are high enough in a certain way, and then you don't have to. I think you don't have to fight once.
And that's been so influential on contemporary games. Like I'm playing The Witcher 3 right now, and when you open up more dialogue options, you can do similar things. You can convince people to do stuff.
Something's definitely lost in modern games. I mean, their production value is so high that you simply can't go down 8 different paths anymore.
That's very true.
You know,
you can either make that castle look really good, or you can make a lot of more permutations for your main story.
Well, and I think modern game makers don't want you to miss a piece of the story either, right? They want to make sure that you can open certain doors and charm certain people and not be, completely just focused on one trade.
Even in a binary game like Fable or Knights of the Old Republic, these development teams spend a lot of effort making a good side and a bad side. And if 90% of the players go down the good side, well, why are we wasting all this effort making a campaign that only 10% of our people are going to play?
All right, what a year for games. 1998.
Are we done? We're done with great games?
We're done with great games. But we have some great movies that came out in 1998. One of the greatest comedies ever, and one of my favorite movies, Joel Nathan Cohen's The Big Lebowski, came out early 1998.
Well, that's just your opinion, man.
No, that is what you did there.
You worked it in.
It is such a good movie.
Yeah, possibly the best Jeff Bridges role. I mean, what a crazy role for him to play. His establishment as an actor at the time was not you'd see him playing the dude. I think that was so unexpected and wonderful.
He was Starman, and then he was the dude.
Yeah, well, he can be a really scary guy too, and he's just like this bumbling, likable, like schmo. Like he's just such a slacker, and like he gets. I mean, the story starts. Somebody pees on his carpet, right? Like somebody pees on Lebowski's rug, and it's a case of
really pulled the room together too.
Mistaken identity, right? And so it becomes his quest. It's like I just want my carpet, Like it's just it matters to him so much, and then you encounter absolutely ridiculous characters, right, throughout the movie.
It's so great.
The Big Lebowski was not a big hit, right? Wasn't that movie like a slow burn over time? And
well, I remember sometimes like it would hit theaters. Like I was in college at the time, and sometimes there'd be an airing of The Big Lebowski, and everybody would be excited and go. And that would have been like 1999, 2000, like in the years after it came out. But man, it really started taking off. When I went to Reykjavik, in Iceland, Reykjavik, there's a Big Lebowski bar there. It's just all Big Lebowski themed.
Making a Big Lebowski
it's
pinball
huge
table.
And it's popular, and there's a Big Lebowski pinball table coming out. Like there's modern worship of the Big Lebowski.
Yeah, and the bowling sequences with Jesus. Right,
Jesus.
The whole like slow motion sequence, the painting sequence, just Steve Buscemi,
just all the nihilists,
John Goodman. The dialogue was so good.
Did the kid steal the car?
What? Oh yeah.
So for sure.
Larry Sellers, son of Arthur Digby Sellers.
Yeah, because his homework is in the car, and he filed the car.
And a lot of these stories,
but they never find the car.
A lot of,
sorry, they never make the connection that he actually did steal the car because he smashes up the neighbor's car.
Yeah,
I thought that was a little bit of a loose end.
A lot of these stories are based on things that happened to them and friends of theirs living in New York or Los Angeles, and that's actually one of them. Somebody's car got stolen. And they found some homework in the back, and one of their friends was a detective. He's like, "Let's go find this kid."
Over there,
and we were talking before. The character of Walter Sobchak, played by John Goodman, this is actually based on John Milius, who directed Red Dawn and like
Conan, like a producer.
Sort of like has this kind of neocon attitude. But I'm so proud of the research that I did for this because I looked up on Wikipedia the list of films that have the greatest instances of the use of the F word in them.
Oh, wow.
And at the time, it ranked...
Wait, you want to guess?
Yeah.
I know the answer.
Okay. I don't know.
It ranks 28th currently, but at the time it was released, it ranked 5th. It was only behind Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, Goodfellas, and Casino.
Right, when we looked into it, the 90s were really the birth of the F-bomb.
Yeah, it really, really took off.
But what about, did you look up FPM?
I didn't look up the FPM, no.
The wonderful thing is, of course...
We should make that stat exist.
Actually, at the time, I think it beat out two of those, one of Scorsese's movies and one of Tarantino's movies for FPM. But there were other movies, like Eddie Murphy's Raw, if you count that, like that had way more per minute.
I don't feel like there being that many Fs. I guess they just sort of weave them in.
The awesome thing is when you watch it on network television, they had to become really creative on how they replace it. So it had the immortal line, "This is what happens when you find a stranger in the Alps."
It's so good.
It's a great line.
It's just
that
the
and Pulp
movie.
Fiction are some of the best made TV adaptations. They're so good, and I didn't realize that's why. Is because of the FPM.
Yeah.
Okay. Because those were always, if those were on TV, you watch The Big Lebowski anyway. But Pulp Fiction is really a great network television experience.
Yeah,
it's wonderful,
man.
Same year, similarly beloved comedy, Rushmore.
Yeah.
Wes Anderson's second major movie, October 9th, 1980, that came out, starring a wonderful return from Bill Murray to film, and then
changed his career.
A new nobody, Jason Schwartzman.
Mm-hmm.
It did change his career path entirely. He was just so good in it too. But yeah, Wes Anderson had made a film called Bottle Rocket, which I really like. Steve's not a big fan of it. But Bottle Rocket didn't have that kind of like that school project feel that Rushmore and obviously all the other movies have.
There's a sweetness to Wes Anderson in general that really was born in Rushmore, which is just great. But I don't know, like there's also a lot of kind of like nastiness in it, and just
well, he calls it a
Bill Murray
heightened
hates
reality.
his kids. It's just hilarious.
Yeah, he takes little things and turns them way up, but not everything. And it's also kind of a microcosm, right? That's a little world that's created, and you can kind of see it in a little diorama. And nothing was more representative than like that opening montage of every club that Max is in, and then of course it ends with him failing out of school.
It's like the most Wes Anderson thing, that montage of the different clubs, like the Beekeepers and the Kite Flyers.
And then these future movies. Yeah, go ahead.
They had these wonderful deadpan moments too, right? Like every character is just kind of slightly off, slightly too mean, and then it has these great set pieces like the theaters, the plays, and everything.
It's overly elaborate stage plays.
It has but it has a very, very unique tone to it. Like even when you watch it now, you've seen so many Wes Anderson movies, but it's just like it's so
a little different from his other movies though too.
It's a really good school movie, and I actually heard, I hope this is true, but he location scouted all over the place looking for the school. I can't find the school. I can't find the school. And then finally he decided, he didn't realize it. It's funny how people don't know their own mind, that he ended up filming at his own school that he worked to, and that's what he couldn't find the place because he'd been picturing his own youth growing up his whole life.
That's excellent.
They were gonna do a helicopter scene. Is another funny fact. That it was like a big overwrought helicopter scene where Max and Bill Murray's character are like riding in a helicopter and surveying an area, and I think Disney was actually producing the movie, but they wouldn't pay for it, and so Bill Murray just wrote Wes Anderson a blank check to do it, but they didn't do the same anyway. But I thought that was really cool. We should talk about really briefly score and soundtrack. Mark Mothersbaugh from Devo did the score, which is wonderful, and it's been used in other movies, which is always weird when I hear the Rushmore music in other movies. But then the soundtrack was a bunch of British Invasion, Beat era British music, Kinks, The Creation, Rolling Stones. It's just wonderful.
It's also good because it fits the mood of the movie, right? Like this angsty kind of like coming of age, but still kind of like struggling with who you are and what being an adult means, which is to me like totally epitomized in the music of those acts. For me, what I really like about it though is it has this illustrative quality. It's very like Charles Addams or like Edward Gorey, you know. But it also has, like you were saying, like that I guess sublime kind of like beauty in weirdness, like John Waters, right? Like John Waters is another auteur like Wes Anderson, where it's like his movies, all the characters are a little bit offbeat, but there's something lovable and endearing about even the worst of them.
Yeah.
That's very different than the Farrelly Brothers movies.
Not as subtle.
Not as subtle. The least subtle movie ever made is called There's Something About Mary. We're going to talk about it right now. It's a great movie, but it has jokes about lots of types of emissions from the human body.
Well, really just the one type.
Well, yeah, well, it has the zipper disaster also, which is pretty horrible.
But that wasn't the first.
How did you get the Frank above the beans?
That's right, in the beginning of the movie.
Yeah, they made Dumb and Dumber before this.
Yes.
And then really cranked it up for Something About Mary, and then unfortunately cranked it up too far for some of their later movies.
The one that's a great one, Woody Harrelson.
Oh yeah.
Right before that was a good movie too. Both have gross out moments, and then they went on to some pretty rough movies.
I like that they stick with. I feel like, I don't know if this is their trademark or anything like this, but they stick with a scene, like, you know, he zips himself up, you know, at prom, and then it just keeps going. Like you expect, okay, the bit's over, the joke's over, like let's move on to the next joke. But like they keep like wringing more and more out of it, and like like the guy comes up to the window, hey, are you?
Yeah.
And then he has to get taken out on the stretcher, and like they really stick with these sort of uncomfortable moments that are funny and then get weird, but then they stick with it long enough that it gets funny again.
But I feel like this movie, I think their career is unique in that they maybe accidentally created very likable characters, right? And like a lot of the movies, I'm not a big fan of all of their movies, but this one, you really like Mary, you like you know, Stiller,
and a lot of people hadn't been introduced to Ben Stiller. He had a Ben Stiller show, and he liked what he did before that. But man, this really catapulted him into stardom. And then Cameron Diaz was kind of new at this time. Well, she was new at this time. This made her, and she was the object of this whole movie, and that kind of made her a superstar. You know, I remember she was on the cover of Rolling Stone, like right after that. She's just everywhere. Really need to introduce.
But yeah, the hair gel scene, everybody remembers it. I watched it with my parents. I was like, oh God, but they thought it was hilarious. They loved this movie.
Good.
Yeah.
So I have another reading for you all.
Oh no, here we go.
This is from Pears. No, just kidding. This is Roger Ebert's review, a lofty review of There's Something About Mary. What a blessed relief is laughter. It flies in the face of manners, values, political correctness, and decorum. It exposes us for what we are, the only animal with a sense of humor.
Ooh, wow, that is very lofty for There's Something About Mary.
Yeah, no kidding.
Ebert. Wow. Goodness.
From the creators of Dumb and Dumber.
All right.
Humans are the...
That's a good movie.
He cut and paste the same review for Saving Private Ryan also that year. So
speaking of Saving Private Ryan...
Sam Way.
So, Saving Private Ryan, that's the big blockbuster action movie of this year. It's a Spielberg movie, but it's a somber Spielberg affair for what he'd been doing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an action movie, but it's also it's serious subject matter. It's not we're not shooting aliens.
We're not
anymore.
making contact. We're not hugging aliens.
He'd sort of danced around World War II in a silly, cartoony way, you know, and stuff like Indiana Jones and other movies. And this time really ran straight at it. Well,
and his TV series also, Amazing Stories, had some great World War II stories in it.
Schindler's List. But I mean, this is one of the great war movies, maybe the great war movie.
And it's so, I mean, like the opening scene, the Omaha Beach storm, like it's so iconic, and like you can see after this movie came out, war movies changed.
Yeah.
Like they all showed like this kind of scary moment where, you know, when battle erupts, that, you know, it's just deafening and chaos, and like you don't know where you are, you don't know which direction to go. You see bodies everywhere, and like the iconic sound effects too of like the grenade going off, and it's in every video game now.
You mentioned like how effective it is though, but it does it without the usual Hollywood conventions of like flame and muzzle flashes. Like everything is very dry. I mean, like literally dry, like the visuals and the sounds, which I think is probably a lot more realistic.
And when you can't hear, it gets even creepier, right? Like when the sound is muffled out.
Oh yeah.
Oh, when you get like a little concussion from the grenade blast or whatever.
Extremely disorienting, and you know, great use of like shaky cam, using it properly instead of as a crutch. You know, it's disorienting and confusing for the audience and which way's up, and it's just a master craft.
The other thing, if you rewatch that scene, you'll notice that the Nazis are total ciphers. You actually don't really see the Nazis in any, like in the beginning scenes. They're just like tiny little dots in the pillboxes up there shooting. It's all centered around the soldiers storming the beach, and it's just very, very powerful.
Every foot of ground,
force of nature of the waves and the bullets and everything.
They gain ground in an honest way, and it feels like a believable space. Like you can picture in your head, like, okay, they've just taken, you know, they've crossed 10 yards, so they have this farther to go before they can get up to the hill. Like it feels like a very real space before they sort of earn, you know, their climb up the hill after a lot of them didn't make it.
That's true of all the sequences in the movie where they have the sniper sort of over the city square and everything. It's very, very tactical.
And it was very shocking, right? That sequence when it came out, that's what everybody talked about. But then as the movie progressed, I mean, there's a certain level of sweetness to it, right? Like the story is a woman has already is about to get 3 letters saying 3 of her 4 sons have been killed in the war, and so now, you know, they're trying to save the 4th and bring him home, right? That's the whole background behind the story. There's that sweetness to it, like you know, it's worth rescuing this person even though he's a nobody, but he becomes special in this war. But then it also has, like, you know, we talked about the creepy, like, kill scenes, and like it has all these really weird, memorable, scary moments.
And great performances by Tom Sizemore, Edward Burns, and Matt Damon's in it. I think before I knew much about Matt Damon.
That's what's interesting is they deliberately cast Matt Damon to cast, you know, a nobody. They wanted, you know, they wanted kind of a pretty boy, pretty face, but not a well-known actor, and then he'd become huge before the movie came out. You know, it's like in the time he was cast, from the time the movie came out, he became a superstar. So I mean, that plan unfortunately.
Oh, really?
Didn't pan
So
out.
people did know him. From what?
Oh, I would have to look. Maybe Good Will Hunting.
Yeah, it would have been Good Will Hunting.
But Tom Hanks too. I mean, often, you know, was the funny man. You know, like we knew him from movies like Big more than these dramatic roles. Now his career has completely changed. Of course, you know, you've seen him in Road to Perdition and all this stuff. But that was an unusual role for him at the time too.
All right. In 1998, we talked about some really great movies, really great video games.
I was so busy in '98.
But possibly the greatest anime TV series of all time debuted that year, Cowboy Bebop.
Yeah, I mean, there's not really enough great things to say about Cowboy Bebop. I mean, not to sound trite, but I kind of don't even know where to start. It's the one anime that I would say, anyone, I don't know about anime, I don't know where to start. Watch Cowboy Bebop. Like, it's 26 episodes. They're each sort of constructed like little miniature movies. The plot is there's these sort of bounty hunters that things are just never going their way. They're always broke. Their ship's always about to break down. And it's a great setup for a show because there is sort of a story threading through it, but each one is them going after a bounty usually. And so, you know, they're at a new place, they're in a new city, and so that's just a really smart conceit for how the plot gets rolling.
Kind of like Firefly, it sounds like.
Yeah, the Firefly is very influenced by, it's actually very similar,
I was actually surprised that Hollywood has not discovered Cowboy Bebop, right? That is not a major franchise.
I mean, there's been those rumblings, you know, the movie with Keanu Reeves and all
kind
the
of a
rest of it.
silly name, maybe that has something to do with it.
Maybe, yeah.
It's very, very notable for its jazz soundtrack. The theme song is really, really good, and the use of music throughout is really notable.
Bongos.
It's something that's hard to articulate if people haven't seen it, but it doesn't feel dated. Like, you know, Saving Private Ryan is great. All these video games have been great, but Cowboy Bebop could be made today and it would feel the same. I feel like they would have made the same creative choices and the same writing and the same animation. Incredibly ahead of its time in that sense. You know, great use and depiction of the internet at a very, very early stage. The characters are all really interesting in that they're friends but kind of don't trust each other, and this combination like all of us. I hope that comes through in the camera. They all love each other but are kind of unwilling or unafraid to show it. It's a really fantastic show that I rewatch probably once every 5 years or so. You know, and it's truly one of the greats of the medium.
So while you were watching that show in 1998, I was getting really, really excited for The Phantom Menace. The Phantom Menace will appear next year in 1999. Get excited, because that's how I felt before Phantom Menace came out, which, the trailer in 1998.
I downloaded that trailer on CompuServe, and it took me like a day. And then I was like, I can't wait to watch it tomorrow.
It is one of the greatest trailers, right? Like, because you really didn't know what was going on. You didn't know that 90% of the movie was a race.
But to hear more about The Phantom Menace and the Phantom Menace trailer, which was awesome, the lead up to Phantom Menace is awesome. That's why we're including it in the next episode of The History of Awesome, 1999, along with some actually truly awesome things, The Matrix, Fight Club, the Dreamcast. Stick around for that. 1999 coming up next. Thanks, everybody.